Hey, welcome back to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with Russell Martin and Brent Aiken. We are glad you're joining us today, and we hope that you find this conversation helpful, insightful, and encouraging as you continue to lead your students in ministry. We want to remind you to follow us on social media at Talk Student Men on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and also check out our website, studentministryconversations.org for, just check it out. Also, if you are on Clubhouse, join us for our student ministry Convos on Monday afternoons and Thursday mornings. Today, we're going to hear an interview with Luke Gajary, and he's going to share a little bit about how to get on board with your pastor's vision. So, Brent, this was your conversation. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah. So in this episode, like you said, I spoke with Luke and we talked about a really, really challenging thing when it comes to youth ministry, because a lot of us don't step out and see this as a forefront concern. And that is, are you there to build your own ministry, or are you there to support and supplement what your pastor's vision is already doing? And so with that, it was a really, really challenging episode. It was a great conversation, one of my favorites that we've done so far, and just really, really excited about getting this one out.
So without any more delay, here is Brent's conversation with Luke Gajary.
All right, what's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. I am here today with Luke Gajary. He is a youth pastor in Abilene, Texas at New Hope Church. And before I go on to any more about him, why don't I just let him introduce himself? So, Luke, what do we need to know about you?
Hey, Brent, man, thanks for having me. This is love what you guys are doing here. I don't know how to start. So I'm kind of a theological mutt. So I grew up in a charismatic Mennonite church, which is just saying that sounds crazy, but that's the church I grew up in. Moved to Texas I was born in New York, grew up in Pennsylvania, moved to Texas when I was 17. There got put into a Pentecostal Assemblies of God church, then left that church for a while, went to a non-denominational church, went into ministry, in youth ministry and a parachurch ministry with the Assemblies of God, and became a youth missionary to high schools. And we did high school outreaches, then took a season of sabbatical from ministry. Just felt like the Lord was asking me to be a better husband than I was a minister. And so I backed away from ministry for what I thought was going to be a 2-year season, went into digital marketing, social media marketing, email campaigns, all that stuff for a couple of different companies. And what I thought was going to be 2 years ended up being 7 years. And then 3.5 years ago, the Lord just began to open doors for us to go back into ministry and put up a lot of flags that made that very clear that this was a season for our family. So I've been married 10 years in this July marks 10 years. And then I got 3 kids, a 6-year-old girl, 4-year-old boy, and a 1-year-old girl. And so that's me in a nutshell. I don't know. It kind of got a weird mixture of all kinds of different backgrounds. So.
Yeah. So in other words, you're busy.
That too. Yeah.
But I do want to boast on you a little bit as well. Luke also he runs a company called digitalchurch.co. It's a graphic design and web design, social media marketing company that just goes directly to broadcast and advertise for churches. And so You can check him out. At the end of this podcast, he'll list all of the ways that you can follow him, and he'll be sure to throw that in. But then my guy has also written a book. So give us a chance to talk about your book for just a second, and then we'll get into the topic for today.
Yeah, man. So that was fun. I love that in today's day and age, it's so easy to put content out into the world. And I've wanted to write a book since I was a kid. I had this benchmark that by the time I'm 30, I'm going to publish a book. And so a week before my 30th birthday, I self-published my first book. It's called Tell It Well. You can find it on Amazon by searching my name or Tell It Well and my name. It's just about the idea that believers have incredible stories that God has done. We're not short of stories. We're not short of miracles. We're short on telling them in an articulate way. And so I'm really passionate about helping believers find their God-given voice and articulate the stories of the supernatural, the miraculous, the incredible that God has done in your life, and bringing other people along for the ride. So Tell It Well.
Man, that's awesome. And that might be another podcast on the road. But so at least for today, though, our topic is how to get on board with your pastor's vision. And for youth ministry, especially, sometimes we walk into churches where the pastor's been there for decades, and they are very, very established. And then other times, depending on denomination or where you are there, and then pastors come in halfway through, and you really have to kind of learn how to get along with them, even though you've had a cycle and you've already have this plane of motion intact, and you kind of have to learn how to get behind his vision as well. So why is getting behind the pastor's vision so important?
Well, this really became clear to me, even working in the secular world for a while, because doing marketing, you have to create results, but you also have to do what your boss wants. And so I had to shelve a lot of my personal preference in order to make my boss happy. And there was a tension between doing things the way that I felt like they were supposed to be done and doing things that my boss wanted done. And I feel like that tension exists in ministry. There's this other dynamic going on that when ultimately we're called to submit, unless you're the lead pastor, you're called to submit to the vision of the house. Unfortunately, this is a good thing, a blessing and a curse. Many youth pastors are extremely entrepreneurial in spirit. They're very go-getters. You're also a graphic designer. You probably have a side hustle. You are extremely multifaceted, and you're very, very go-getter. You get stuff done. You have this, you could almost build a church because you're essentially building a church within a church. The temptation is to build it around your vision and not around your pastor's vision. And I have a story. A friend of mine we went to Bible school together. We graduated. He went into the secular world, just started working a job and supporting his family, trying to start a family. And then years down the road, ends up getting interviewed for a church at a youth ministry position. And he gets hired. It felt like he was super excited about it. He was very like, oh man, this is a youth ministry opportunity that I haven't had in years. I'm jumping in. In retrospect, he probably rushed the interview process a little bit and didn't ask as many questions as he should have. And 3 years later at that church, he's extremely frustrated. It's a pretty large church, but he's frustrated because he's doing what he knows to do in youth ministry, but his pastor's frustrated because he's not producing results that his pastor wanted. His pastor was he wanted big, long services. He wanted long worship. He wanted a very spontaneous, kind of charismatic type youth ministry experience. And my guy was trying to create very like, not, I don't want to say seeker sensitive, but like very, I mean, we're going after the lost, right? So we're creating evangelistic services. I hang out with students a lot in their schools. He's creating this dynamic that's very student focused with an emphasis on reaching the lost. And his pastor was very frustrated because he's like, you're not doing what I want to do. And so it was a great church reaching people, and they're incredible. But there was this friction and this tension of, at the end of the day, you're maybe building a great youth ministry, but it doesn't fit what I want. And so after 3 years, they parted ways, and it was kind of a messy situation. So I think it's so vital, obviously, knowing ahead of time what your pastor's vision is, but even halfway through, if you rushed into it, are you willing to kind of fit into that vision, or is it time to move on? And I think many of us would say we want to stay at our churches. We want to stay doing what we're doing and pouring into the kids we have. So I think it's important that we learn how to create our ministries, not around what we want, but what our pastor's vision for that community is.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's great. And so, but I think the biggest struggle with this potentially is you have so many different areas that this can kind of tie into play. You can be moving into a church where you're in the hiring process and you're going through interviews. And so that's what I kind of want to hit on first. So you're interviewing for a position. How do you ask the right questions, or what are the right questions that you need to ask in order for you to understand the pastor's vision?
I think you need to know the culture of the church really well, and then have a desire to fit the youth ministry in that. So like, I have, when I don't know how to phrase this the right way, but like, if you could pick like large churches that are doing similar things to your context. So like, for example, let's just talk about Bethel and Elevation. Okay. Bethel in Redding and Elevation Church in North Carolina, the two very different kind of ends of the spectrum theologically. And I would, if I was interviewing somewhere, when I interviewed, I would ask if you have to be one of these, and there's kind of a needle on the gauge, which way is your needle leaning? Is it leaning towards the elevation, or is it leaning towards the Bethel? And that probably answers some questions. Obviously, we all probably have different opinions about each of those churches and what they believe theologically. But my point there is that they're a gauge. How a church relates to those is a gauge on what they value in ministry. And so pick something that you can compare it to, that this is going to be a good gauge of what is important to them. Is it in the tension between, man, we're raising up the believers we have, or we're going out and getting new believers? Where does your heart fall in that? And is it going to line up with your pastor's vision that you're potentially being hired into? And is it going to be a rub? Like I said, the clearest example is the story of my friend, that his heart was very much, man, I'm going to leave the 99 and go get the one. And his pastor was more like, I care more about the 99 and pouring into what we already have. It's like, okay, well then this isn't going to work. And so I have found a helpful practical tip is find something tangible that we all know of that we can compare ourselves to, not good or bad. I'm not saying like in the Bethel elevation analysis, I'm not saying one is good, one is bad, or they're both bad, or they're both good. I'm just saying they give you a very clear picture on what two things are important. And that could be in the relationship to school outreaches. Do you want me in the office a lot, or do you want me in schools? When I was interviewing at New Hope, they had just finished an office remodel, and they had cut all the office sizes in half. And our pastor said, I've created very small offices because I don't want you in there very often. And I was like, bet, okay. Like, I like being on the school campuses, so I will not be in my office very often. Now, COVID obviously pivoted all that, and I'm wishing I had a little bit bigger of an office because I'm in there more than when I first got hired. But that to me communicated, when we're not creating these big cushy offices, we're creating a space that's almost uncomfortable because we don't want you in there all the time. And so that to me matched up with my value of, I don't think a pastor should be in his office a lot. So in my opinion, so to me that's another practical. And then I in history of New Hope hiring people, I have been told I was the most inquisitive. I asked the most questions. Somebody called me obnoxious in the interview process because I had a question for every question and then a follow-up question to that question. I asked the most questions about anything. During the interview process, my pastor took a while to respond to a couple of my emails, and he said he was in Singapore, but I think honestly, he just got tired of my emails because I was asking so many questions. I think he planned a trip to Singapore just to get out of me asking so many questions. But I had just gone through this. My friend had just gone through this story that I shared at the beginning, and it created a sense of like, man, he had so many issues at this church because he didn't ask enough questions. And I am not going to be that guy. So I asked an obnoxious amount of questions. I should have pulled up the emails that I sent of questions that I asked. Another one was like, I like to write books. Can I be at this church and continue to write books? Because some churches think that if you're on staff with them, everything you produce belongs to that church. And I was asking, not in a selfish way, but hey, if I'm on staff at this church and I write books, is that okay? And his heart was, yeah, we want to empower and equip our employees, our staff to do their own thing, not just everything has to fit in this New Hope box. And so I was like, okay, so that was another kind of green flag of vision. Like, your vision is not to control everybody's narrative. You can let your leaders run. And so that was another indicator. I'm just kind of, I'm ranting now, but does that kind of answer that question?
Yeah, no, that's good. And those are great questions, because you have to kind of have the mindset of, you have to know what you're walking into, so to speak. And one of the things with that is a lot of, like you said, there's in office and out of office preferences. There's time preferences. One of the churches that I previously applied for that I actually turned down when they offered me the job was, they wanted me in the office 40 hours a week, and they wanted me in the school another 15 hours a week.
Wow.
And I was like, dude, I'm married. I have 2 kids. Like, I can't do this. And he was like, well, ministry comes first, your family comes second. And I said, nope, sorry.
Oof. Yeah.
Like, see you later. I mean, cause our hearts were not in the same place, and it's nothing against that guy. I'm sure that he found someone else, but it was something that, like, when he said that, I was like, no, this can't work, because we have very, very different ideals. And then I've had other pastors that have come in the middle of my ministry time at a church, and he's the new guy, and he comes in and the first thing he asks is, how are you ministering to your family? And I was like, dude, I like this guy because we're on the same page. And so this kind of transitions into the next question, though, of you're already in your position. So like, say you've been here for 3, 4, 5 years, you have a good thing going. You already have kind of passed that honeymoon stage of youth ministry to where you're like not the youth pastor, but you're the replacement of the youth pastor. You haven't kind of like made the mantle that you're the guy yet.
Yeah.
How can youth pastors start to put this into practice today if they are the longer on staff person and the pastor is the new guy? How do you transition from what you already have to what you need to do in order to be under the pastor's vision?
That's an interesting thought. And I've never personally been in that situation. So I'll just speak to some practicals of what I think there's a temptation to go, like, you've established your youth ministry probably in the first year. You've gotten a good rhythm. You've kind of set things up to fit your culture, and you've set things up in a way that you're there clicking at the church. But I think there's a temptation to just lean more into that and to go, okay, we've set this up already. We're just this is who we are now, and it's never going to really change. I am so like, I turn my youth ministry, as far as programming goes, I turn that thing upside down like every 6 months, because listen, Fortnite, one of the most successful games of all time, depending on who you ask, but it's been incredibly successful in large part, I believe, because they change everything about the game like every couple of months. The new season comes out, they take weapons away, they add things, they change the map. Now you can like hunt animals. Like, what the heck? So I believe a large part of why it is so captivated the younger Gen Z is because it changes so much all the time. And I think we've got to be okay with, this thing is going to look very different than when it did when you started, whether you're in the middle of a leadership transition or not. I just think that's a principle overall. Like, be willing to blow the whole thing up and start over. Like, I literally do that all the time. And we evaluate what's not working. I think when your pastor comes in, if you're in the middle of this transition season, you've got to do a good audit of your youth ministry and of yourself. You've got to get to know your pastor, and then you've got to audit, what am I doing right now that currently fits well with that, and what doesn't work, and slowly pivot. Like, we can pretty quickly become like that evergreen ship stuck in the canal if we don't do little things to stay centered. So the goal is not to be exactly like your pastor. The goal is to stay centered. And if we drift one way or the other, man, you're stuck. And so if you can do everything you can to, like, I did my taxes a couple months ago. Okay. I had to audit everything. I don't want the IRS to audit me, so I'm going to audit myself. I'm going to take a stock of, did you really spend that much money on this? Did you really, like, your housing allowance and all these other things? Like, do you have an accurate picture of what you're doing and the results it's producing? And you'd rather do an audit of your ministry yourself than have somebody else criticize you and pick it apart down the road. So take stock of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how well it fits in with this pastor's vision, whether it's the guy that's been there for 20 years or whether it's the new guy that's shifting transition. He's going to transition leadership in your church. Are you going to follow suit and transition the way your youth ministry looks? Don't be the yes man. Don't be the guy that just does whatever pastor wants, but do your part to fit in with what his vision is. And there's so much fluff we do in youth ministry that doesn't really matter. And we cling to these games and these things. Not that games are bad, but like, we cling to things that we think are the core of youth ministry. And the core of your youth ministry should be to extend the vision of your church to students, not to do this X, Y, Z, or like, I have some sacred cow stuff that we do in our youth ministry that I love, that I would have a hard time. Like, I would fight you on some things, but the ultimate goal is fitting with what my pastor wants and his vision, not XYZ to make things work in what I think is the right context.
No, definitely. That's great. Yeah. So I think the main thing with this that kind of just is an overlying sense of everything you just kind of did in a bubble is you have to have open communication. Mm-hmm. If you aren't talking to your pastor regularly, you are not doing it right.
Right.
You need to be your pastor needs to be in the know of how y'all do things. You need to be in the know on your pastor's vision and plan for the church. And y'all have to be on the same page. And sometimes that's difficult depending on personalities and everything else. But this is an opportunity for you to kind of lay down your pride in some moments and say, all right, is this really worth it? Like, should I die by the sword on this one instance?
Yeah.
And a lot of times, especially when you kind of do that audit of yourself, like you said, it's something that you're like, no, I think I can probably let this slide.
Right.
And so there are very, very few things that I would consider worthy of dying by the sword. But it's also something that there has to be compromise on both ends. And in a healthy, open communication relationship between you and your pastor, compromise will happen on both sides.
Yeah.
You will compromise on a few options and a few topics, but more than likely the pastor will also see, hey, they're really working on this and they really they have a passion for this. So I'm going to let them do this because ultimately you're building each other up and you're building up the ministry as a whole.
Right. And I think I'm fortunate now to be in a situation where my pastor, we have a great relationship. We talk all the time. He's very approachable. It's a very open channel. And I tell people that, and they're kind of like, dang, must be nice. So I know that is not the reality for a lot of people. And I previously worked for a pastor that it was communication was horrible. It was just awful. We liked each other, but we never talked. Right. And so I had to learn how to read between the lines, even if I knew I wasn't going to get a consistent sit down conversation. So one thing I did, I would read the books he was reading to try to get a gauge for where he was at. And so I'm like, if I know he's reading this book, that sounds kind of stalkery, but if I know he's reading this book about prayer, then I should probably dive into this because he's probably going to lean into something on prayer. And I would kind of try to, I don't know, it sounds super creepy now that I'm saying it out loud, but I would try to have a gauge in the unwritten, unspoken stuff that was happening that I knew were in his head, but that he wasn't going to sit down and tell me, hey, I really feel like we need to lean into prayer in this season. I'm never going to get that clear direction, but I can read between the lines and kind of pick up based on what he's feeding himself, where we're going and what I need to be probably working on latching on to. So that's unfair because that's a lot more work for me, for the youth pastor to have to read between the lines. Ultimately you should just be able to sit down with your pastor and talk, but I know that is not the reality a lot of times. And so it's a little more work, but I think that you can find creative ways to get where your pastor's going without having him hand you this checklist of here's my vision for this season.
Yeah. And it definitely should not be like your Nicolas Cage National Treasure styling, trying to decipher codes and everything like that. I mean, open communication is definitely the route to go, but like you said, sometimes that's not the case.
Yep.
I've had very, very differing pastors. As I've said in previous episodes, I am from the Methodist Church, which means that we are a part of an itinerant system where the pastors move a lot. And so I've been in ministry for a little over 10 years, and I have had 6 pastors that I've served under. And so while that is something that is good, because fresh, gives you a bunch of different perspectives, we have to be on the ball all the time. And some pastors are great at communication and some aren't. And so you really have to kind of gauge that. And then you have to do your homework as well. It's almost like researching behind the scenes for any decision in life, anything that you're going to do, you kind of have to have that research model behind it because sometimes the conversation isn't there.
Yeah, no, that's good.
So now we've talked about the entering in as in a new hire during the interviews. We've talked about having the pastor come in after you're here. This kind of tangents into my next question of, do you think there's ever a too late to get on board? Maybe y'all are both in the same church. Y'all been in the same church for 4 or 5 years and y'all have not been on the same page. Is there ever a too late for y'all to kind of find that space where y'all can be on the same vision?
I think there is. I think the only too late is when you have a hard heart. I think there does come a point where you have to decide, I'm either going to stay here and work this out, or in the case of my friend, this isn't working, I need to leave. I cannot build youth ministry in this church because the vision is so different. I think the only way where I would say, no, it's too late, it's not going to work, you need to leave, is when your heart gets hard. And I've heard it said like this: good leadership is a soft heart with thick skin. We need to have thick skin, not take everything personal, but we also need to have a soft heart and be tenderhearted towards those we lead and those that are leading us. I was reading in Mark 8, and Jesus had just fed the 4,000, and then he feeds the 7,000 or 5,000. No, it was 5,000 and then 4,000. And they're in a boat crossing the sea, and they're grumbling that they don't have any food and nobody brought food. And they had already seen these miracles happen. And Jesus says this in 8. I have it pulled up here. He says, why are you arguing about having no bread? You didn't bring any lunch. Like, don't you know or understand even yet? Are your hearts too hard to take it in? You have eyes, can't you see? You have ears, can't you hear? Don't you remember anything at all? When I fed the 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread, how many baskets of leftovers did you pick up after? 12, they said. And when I fed the 4,000 with 7 loaves, how many large baskets of leftovers did you pick up? 7, they said. Don't you understand yet? He asked them. And so Jesus is saying, we just saw these miracles where I provided way more food than we even needed. And you're grumbling that nobody brought lunch. Like, don't you get it? And it became very evident to me through that passage that it's possible to be in the middle of a move of God and have a hard heart. It is possible to be in the middle of the miraculous and still be hardened. And the Greek for that word hardened literally is the same word used as the word for stone. Jesus is literally saying your heart it's not possible for your heart to receive anything because it's coated in like this stone. And that scares me a little bit because it means that I could be in the middle of something supernatural happening and be completely hard-hearted to what's happening. And that would be the shift where I would say that's too late. But many of us are not there. We're just a little bit stubborn. We're just a little bit like having a hard time kind of fitting in. And I recently had to come to grips with this, especially with COVID, because I'll be honest, I was really frustrated in June of 2020 where everything was online for a while. And I was like, man, I left the digital marketing world to go into ministry. Like, why are we, this is my life now. Like all we're doing is online stuff. This is so dumb. And I got really frustrated. And there was, as we pivoted out of that summer, we were opening back up the youth ministry and starting to do in-person events again. And I just felt in love with youth ministry all over again. And I was like, man, this is awesome. I was about to hit the 3-year mark at our church. And I was like, still just, man, God was doing some awesome stuff in our young people. We were seeing kids that hadn't been in church in years come back to church, that hadn't known Christ since they were little. They became back in a relationship with Jesus. We were seeing some crazy stuff happen. And it just made my heart swell to go, man, screw all this other stuff. Like, I love youth ministry. I went to a youth ministry conference in October in the DFW area. And there was, I had some team members with me and we split up into these breakout sessions, and I got the breakout session I didn't really want. But when I go to a conference, we split up and we kind of compare notes. And so it's like, you're going to go to this session, you're going to go to this session, you're going to go to that session. And then we're going to meet at lunch and kind of debrief each other so we all can learn a little bit of everything. And so I got stuck with the session that nobody else wanted, and I was kind of discouraged about it. I got in there, and the guy, the night before, the session was about saying yes to God. And I was like, tears, crying. The worship was so good. And I'm like, yes, God, like I say yes to the call of youth ministry all over again. Like, I will stay in this thing for life. And I wrote a note on my phone that night after the conference, after that night session, and about like basically a meeting I wanted to have with my pastor, like quitting everything else I did at the church and just focusing on youth ministry. And I said, I don't want to be in anything else. I don't want to touch the online stuff anymore. We need to outsource that or figure something out. I don't want to do anything else except youth ministry. Like, that's what you hired me for. I'm going to go back to this. All these other things I've got thrown on my plate, I want to get rid of it. And I'm done. And I wrote it all down in this note on my phone. That was the Monday night. Then the Tuesday we got up and we had the breakout sessions. I went to this breakout session and I'm like stewing. I'm like, youth ministry. Yes. Like, forget everything else. And this guy that's speaking at this breakout session, I don't even remember the main thrust of his talk, but he says something. He talks about the tension of serving your pastor well and wanting to build a great youth ministry. And he says, what if you're at your church, not just to create the best youth ministry you can, but to serve your pastor's vision in whatever capacity you're asked?
Ooh.
And I was like, oh, and I was like, did you read the note in my phone right now? Like, what the heck, man? And so I just was super, like, the blood rushed to my face. I felt super convicted. I was like, okay, Lord, like, this is, so I went up to him afterwards and we talked about it. And I just told him, like, and this guy is a leader in our denomination. He's a very high level leader. And so I respected him. And I just, there's this tension of, I want to build this, but my pastor needs this. And so in some cases that may be doing things. Maybe it's like you also been asked to lead kids, but your heart is more towards youth, or maybe you're handling all the graphics and media stuff, because most of us youth pastors are nerds. Like, whatever it is, are you called just to be the youth pastor? Maybe that's the case. Or are you called to serve your pastor's vision in this season? That may mean being stretched a little bit. That may mean doing things outside of the job. And listen, we all have stuff that's outside of the job description, but I'm talking about that deeper level where it feels like weighted, like this almost is too much. This almost feels way outside the scope, or this feels like we didn't even talk about this. My pastor, when he went into youth ministry, he got hired as a youth pastor. The day he showed up at this church in Oklahoma, their worship leader quit. And so the day he showed up, he also became the worship pastor at their church and the youth pastor. And that got thrown on him day one. And he served in that church for like 7 years. And so I think there's a point where yes, your youth ministry should fit the vision of your pastor, but also it should think bigger than just youth ministry. Like, your goal at that church is to crush it for the sake of your pastor's vision. And that may, in my case, that may or may not always look like just doing youth ministry. That may mean I get other stuff on my plate, and I'm ultimately working unto the Lord, not just Chuck Farina, my pastor. I'm working unto the Lord. And that means that however I can faithfully serve my pastor, whatever I can bring to the table there, I need to do that. What if you're at your church, not just to create the best youth ministry you can, but to serve your pastor's vision in whatever capacity that looks like? So that just really challenged me. I don't know if that super clearly answers the question. I know I'm dipping into a couple different things we've talked about, but I don't think it's too late, but I think it requires us pivoting and being okay with it, doing it with a good heart.
Man, holy cow. What great, man. I'm like, I need to quit this podcast now and go like have a quiet moment. Like we'll come back to this later. No, but geez. Yeah, that, wow. So train of thought, because that caught me off guard. That was good stuff. So yeah, we have this definitely. I love what the question that you kind of just challenged us all with, the kind of, are you there to build a youth program? Or are you there to serve your pastor's vision to whatever effect you have to? And a lot of times that involves, and this is a question that just kind of came to me in that topic. A lot of times that does inquire other things, and that does require us to kind of stretch our limits and kind of go outside of maybe our comfort zone of youth ministry. And one of the things that my church especially does is we on staff have all bought into the belief that we are one staff. Mm-hmm. Like, and we are not different ministries. We are not different programs. We are one staff, and we are all there for each other. And so that requires, it requires buy-in to the vision, because as much as I am here for youth ministry, I'm also here to help the young adult ministry. I'm also here to help the adult ministry. I regularly help the kids ministry in whatever facets I need. We have a Mother's Day Out program, which I am in occasionally checking in kids. I'm occasionally helping run and record videos and like record their services. And especially with the year of COVID, when they weren't able to do like the end of year ceremonies and stuff like that. And so kind of buying into your pastor's vision is buying into all of what the church has to offer sometimes. And I think that's super important. I think we can fall into the line somewhere. And I'd almost venture as far into saying buy into the lie that we're built for one thing. Mm-hmm. Because in all reality, the church is the church, and we're here to minister to the church. Our goal and our specific focus might be youth, but I have things to offer in every light, and God wants to use me in different seasons and different times in all areas of the church ministry that I have. And so we have to be open to that. And so sometimes saying yes to God and sometimes saying yes to the pastor's vision means that we might not get to do all the fancy bells and whistles that we want to do, or we might have to shift the focus to where we have volunteers on staff that can cover things, or we outsource other events that are going on in the church through volunteers that we have, because we're called to be there for the church. And especially if you call the church that you work at home, which is what I really hope you do, because if you work at a church that you don't call home, it's a very taxing season.
Yeah.
Because you see it as a job and you don't see it as a place to like experience life with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so having that is super, super prevalent. I think it's important. But you have to kind of buy into not only the pastor's staff, but pastor's vision, but you have to kind of be willing to buy into the vision of all the other staff around you as well. And so when they have dreams and ideas, you kind of have to buy into their vision as well. And like we said, with open communication, most of the time they'll buy into yours too. And so you're building that unity, you're building that team focus to where it's not the youth pastor versus the adult pastor versus the children's pastor who's going to have the most on Wednesday. It's how are we going to advance the kingdom of God together collectively as the body that we are, as the staff that's unified together. And a big part of that is a pastor who leads well. And we have to get behind the vision of that. So that's fantastic, dude. Are you there to build a youth program? Or are you there to support your pastor's vision? Like good stuff.
I'll be honest, I still wrestle with that. You're even talking and it's grating against me because it's so exhausting to do that, to feel like I can't just focus on youth. I fought this, man, for so long. Like I'm just a youth pastor. Let me focus on youth ministry. And I had to stop saying that. Like I'm not just the youth pastor. I'm there to serve whatever I'm asked. Now, obviously you're listening to this because you're in youth ministry and you've been hired at your church to do youth ministry, or you're serving at your church to do youth ministry. And there should be some facet of like, I'm in this lane, right? You can't be all things to all people. Like you only got so much of yourself to go around. So if you're serving faithfully in like the senior adults ministry, I question how much capacity you have to pour out consistently in youth then. But there is an aspect of unity. Like there needs to be, like I'm brainstorming right now with our children's pastor. There's a school that's reached out to him to talk about our teachers are fried and burned out. Like we need something for our teachers to latch onto. And we do stuff with this elementary school. We partner with them. We bring meals and all that. But they're asking like, hey, you're taking care of our kids, doing great, but what can we do for the teachers? And so now I've been pulled in on this project to go, how can we create resources for teachers specifically in this elementary school to monitor their mental and spiritual health? And so it's like, part of me is going, man, I'm the youth pastor. I don't know. It's an elementary school, figure it out. But man, one day those elementary students are going to be in my youth ministry. And I would love to have healthy teachers in that elementary school that are feeding my youth ministry. And so it's a bigger picture than just like youth ministry is a bigger picture than just what happens on your Wednesday or your Sunday night. And so don't burn yourself out, but you do need to fight for unity on your team and fight for the overall vision of your church. And this goes back to what I said, our pastor's thing is he doesn't want us in the office a lot. So I can do more helping these elementary school than sitting at my office computer answering emails, so that all goes back to we're both together fitting under what our pastor wants for our church.
Yeah. And this kind of just popped into my head, but I think it fits super, super well. You serve a God that's bigger than your youth program.
Yeah.
So don't limit him to working in your program.
Yeah.
Like he will absolutely blow your mind and give you opportunities that you've never, ever dreamed of if you allow him to.
Yeah.
If you let him move in the way that he wants to move and you don't say, all right, God, you have this bubble, work. Like that's not how it works. Like, and ultimately, I mean, this goes into other conversations, like your ministry is influenced and you are filled by so many other things that like, if you're not plugged in and interactive in other ministries and other opportunities for you to be engaged, your ministry is going to suffer because of it. Now, that doesn't mean that you need to be the one mopping the floor after the children like have their messy craft activity every single Wednesday. No, but you need to be willing to step aside your pride sometimes and be the one that's stacking chairs after service.
Yeah.
You need to be the one that's willing to step aside and not necessarily interfere with family time. That's not what I'm saying at all, because I think there's a time and place for work and there's a time and place for family life, and that doesn't need to be misconstrued. But there are things that you do in your work week more than likely that you could probably lay down or you could probably reschedule in order to set aside time to help other ministries.
Yep.
And so, but that all goes back to the unified nature of being on call with your pastor and his vision, and being that one unified staff that's looking to advance the kingdom and not just the youth ministry.
That's right. Yeah, it's huge.
So, for pastors that are currently struggling with this outside of this conversation, obviously, because we've talked about it a lot, do you have any resources or any ideas of like other places that they can reach out to have more ideas?
There's 2 books that I've read that have really helped me with this thought process. One I read when I was in ministry school years ago. It's called A Tale of Three Kings by Gene Edwards. And it's funny, both these books kind of follow the same type of narrative, but they're both written very differently. And that book is about David and Saul, and the way that they interacted with each other, and the way that David submitted to Saul when it didn't feel like it was a super healthy situation. Another book, kind of the same thought process, And David Perceived He Was King, by a guy named Dale Mast. This one we actually read as a staff a couple years ago, and it's very like, God's told you you're to lead, but you're also to submit to Saul. And it's what happens in the in-between, that chunk of time in between. You've been given the anointing and the authority, but you're not the guy yet. You're still got to kind of sit down and shut up, but you're supposed to lead, but you're in the middle. So that book recently I've read, and it has really helped frame I'm not the first person to struggle with this tension. I'm not the first person to fight, to submit to someone else's vision. Like, this has been going on a long time. And so these guys, Dale Mast and Gene Edwards, both really dive into the story of David and Saul. And they're both 2 very different books, but similar type storyline that really helps me. And those are the only things I can really think of as far as like resources or things to help kind of feed this conversation and help you fight this inner tension.
Yeah, no, that's good. I need to look at both of those because I have not heard of those books. So we'll, for this podcast, we'll definitely put links below to each of these books to where you can buy them. And then, man, great stuff. Great conversation. Luke, we're super, super glad that we got to have you on the podcast. But before we go, like I said at the beginning, I promised we'd do this. So how can we connect with you and all the different things that you're doing? Where can we go to purchase your book? Tell us how we can connect to digitalchurch.co, everything.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it. So I kind of talked about this, but I really fought the digital church thing during COVID. And then I just realized, man, this is maybe something God's given me to run with. So we just set up I've got a team of guys that are in youth ministry, and one's a worship pastor, and it's twofold. We want to help resource churches COVID really exposed how poorly we're all doing at the online game. And we forced us to all level up really quickly. Unfortunately, a lot of churches don't have the staff to do that or the means to do that. And so we provide what I call the virtual creative pastor, where there's a team of creatives that can be a resource to a church to help come up with sermon series graphics, print pieces, shirt designs, and then help facilitate the online ministry that's happening as well. And so that's digitalchurch.co. I'm on Instagram. That's probably my most easy way to connect with me. And Luke Gajary, LukeGajary, just at Luke Gajary. And then my links are in the bio for my book, Tell It Well, on Amazon. And I've written another leadership book about that season when I was working in marketing. I wrote a book about the guy that I worked for and some leadership principles I learned from him. And so that was that's on Amazon too. I don't really talk about that one very much, but that was another book that I wrote. And I just love this idea of the youth ministry conversations. I think there's so much life that happens when we latch on to what people are talking about and go, hey, you're struggling with that too. Like, okay, I'm not the only one. And so the whole nature of this podcast, man, is awesome. And what you guys are pulling together, again, I'm going like, what the heck am I doing on this roster? You guys have some superstars that you've interviewed for this. And I'm like, this is really something special. So I'm thankful to have been a part of it, man. And love these conversations you're having.
Yeah, well, and like we said, and we've said this repeatedly over and over, the goal is that we believe everyone has something that we can learn from, whether it be one small tidbit of information or you have a wealth of knowledge over 20, 30 years of youth ministry experience. Everybody has something to learn from. And so whether you're the new guy that is 6 months into your ministry, for the people that have been here for 30 years, that first 6 months is completely foreign because their 6 months of ministry, their first 6 months, their first 2 years, whatever, that was 20, 30 years ago. And so everybody has something that we can learn from. And this has been super refreshing for us as well, because we are learning things. Dude, super challenged today with that, just the concept of that one challenge and question of, are you there to do a youth ministry, or are you there to serve your pastor's vision? Like that's a game changer as far as a challenge.
Still messing with me too, man.
Yeah. So, but that is all we have for this podcast. We wanted to thank you for being on again. Do us a favor, be sure to share this on social media, like our page, share our posts, share this podcast if it was meaningful to you. We'd love to hear what you think as far as comments on the website as well. Feel free to drop some comments and ask questions. And then just a reminder that we do have Clubhouse that we use pretty regularly. So please get on Clubhouse, join us for our conversations. We love you guys, and we'll see you all next time. See ya.
Well, that was great. I really enjoyed that, and I hope that everyone else did as well. Hey, thanks for joining us today. We hope that you were encouraged and inspired by this episode, and that you maybe found some tools that you can use as you continue in your ministry with your students.
Yeah, if you enjoyed this episode and found it helpful, we would ask that you leave a comment and a rating on whatever platform you're listening on. We would appreciate that so much, as it helps us climb up the ratings and get more visibility on our podcast. Also, maybe you might know someone who would benefit from this conversation. Take a moment and share this with them on social media. Tag them and tag us at Talk Student Men on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. So, Russell, you have next week's episode. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I talked with Jonathan Germany, and he is a storyteller and a podcaster and a youth director. And so we talk about the power of stories in youth ministry and how to use those, how to find those, how to create those, and then how to utilize those within ministry. So I'm really excited about this. I hope you're looking forward to it as well. And here's a small clip from that interview.
I try to tell our teenagers part of sharing your story is trying to help them learn to share their story. It's as simple as just saying, I was once here, but because of God, I am here now. Or here's where I used to be, or here maybe is where I am now, but because of God, I'm able to handle the situation better. Just because something's not in. So I think for us, as part of sharing that story is being okay when things aren't going great, and being able to be vulnerable enough to share those parts of our lives. So it all comes down to genuineness and vulnerability, I think. Because especially when you're working with teens, teens will tell, oh man, they'll call you out if you're not being genuine. And now vulnerable, it's a whole different story. You can be too vulnerable with teenagers where it may not be appropriate, but they'll tell if you're not being genuine. If you're making up something or you're just full of fluff, they'll say that's not okay. I'm out, and you'll lose them.
Yeah, we're definitely looking forward to that. Just a reminder, be sure to go to studentministryconversations.org for show notes and links from this episode. Just search for this week's episode number in the search bar. And then also we have other helpful articles and posts on there as well. And if you happen to be with us on the Clubhouse app, look for our room in the Student Ministry Convos Club on Monday afternoons and Thursday mornings, where we host different rooms each week to help support youth pastors out there. Again, thanks for joining us, and we can't wait to see you next week.
Take care.